And one of the biggest business stories to break this week, 8 arrests were made in what has been coined the Great Bank Heist. Now, the liquidator responsible in the matter, the VBS Mutual Bank, says the poor who deposited their savings continue to bear the brunt of the corruption. Anoosh Rooplal told Newzroom Afrika in an exclusive that he has launched over 100 cases of sequestration to recoup billions of rand that were stolen, and that the arrests of former directors of the bank bodes well for the liquidation process.
As a liquidator, it's quite a hard thing, to be going through this process. I've seen your peers and your colleagues, coming under severe criticism, but continue to do the work that you are appointed to do. But in this particular case, there's a bit of a difference between when you were doing your investigation, it involved poor people who put in their savings, and then it involved huge municipalities and the billions that actually belong to huge municipalities. And that's why my big question is, how hard is it to ensure that everyone in that liquidation process is treated fairly when you've got the poorest of the poor on one side and the big guns on the other side? As a liquidator, it must make your job quite a difficult one.
It certainly was the plight of the poor people, so to speak, the guys at the grassroots levels who were majorly impacted. And that is why during the curatorship, I pushed hard, for the vulnerable creditors, as we call them at the time, to be taken care of. And if you recall, the National Treasury issued a guarantee of up to 100,000 rand per depositor. And through that mechanism, I was pleased to say that, I was pleased to announce that the bulk of those vulnerable creditors were in fact, made good. The monies were transferred to Nedbank, and they were able to access their monies via that Nedbank transfer. So, but quite right, that did still leave a residual amount of depositors with balances, over 100,000. And these typically were your burial societies, the stokvels, and those are the bulk of those type of retail depositors, as we term them. And clearly then the commercial depositors and the municipalities. So thankfully, through the mechanism of transferring, the depositors via the 100,000 mechanism, we did manage to address that issue. So right now, the liquidation process, is continuing, and we continue to collect monies that will be for the benefit of all creditors who have proven a claim with the estate.
And when it comes to the recommendations that you have made, to actually, make sure that there is fairness, make sure that, you do, sequestrate those who need to be sequestrated, those who need to be stripped of their directorships. When it comes to those recommendations and that kind of work, it has all of it, followed suit, or you're still waiting for some of the processes to unfold? As we've heard from time to time that indeed assets are being frozen, assets are being sold. If you can take us through those recommendations and some of the things that are quite important when you go through the curatorship and liquidation process.
Yes, so as we stand now, the bank is in liquidation. And I have been appointed as the final liquidator. That was some time back. And basically what that means is I have to recover all assets that's due to the estate, and which is for the benefit of all proven creditors. And that's exactly what our ambit has been, and it's governed by the insolvency laws and the Insolvency Act of the country. And I'm continuing to do that. And as you may be aware, the fraud was quite pervasive. It did extend to quite a number of entities and people. And that's where my recovery efforts from a civil perspective has been to focus on taking legal action. And we have over 100 legal cases that I've launched in order to recover such monies. So they're at various stages of progress. It is slow, but we have made some efforts and had success in recovering monies where we could. So it is an ongoing process and it is a long process. So that's essentially, how we are ensuring that we collect as much as we can, and which will be for the benefit of all the remaining proven creditors of the estate.
And Mr. Rooplal, quite an important question here. I saw a report that in which we were quoted saying that although the initial report had actually, identified about 2.3 billion rand that was actually looted from this bank, but 800 million rands more was stolen. That you have now gleaned. I don't know if they quoted you correctly. I don't know if, but it mentioned 800 million rand that you have since identified since being appointed the final liquidator.
Yeah, so the process of identifying assets belonging to the estate continues. As I mentioned, it's been a complicated process. So I'm not sure where that value has come from, but yes, it perhaps maybe misquoted because there's certain aspects or packages of monies that we try and ring fence and try and recover, and that's through focused recovery efforts. Like I said, with the internal collection team that we have, as well as the court process of recovering monies. So there is certainly still a long way to go. I'm hoping that, obviously, with the criminal action and the movement that we're seeing by the NPA and the Hawks, as we've seen in today's briefing, that certainly does bode well for me as a liquidator, because that will then entail involvement possibly by the asset forfeiture unit, would further seize further assets by the accused or the suspicious, of people that are called suspects in these cases. So through that effort as well, that's a mechanism that I'm looking to, also secure and recover cash for the benefit of the creditor.
This must have been a very difficult case. It is, because it's still ongoing. There's a long way to go. But for you personally, as a liquidator, this must be a very tough case because of the people that are involved. And you have thorough experience, years of experience doing the work that you do. But I'm sure you may have not encountered such a case in the past, and it did, raise some, personal hardships and professional too at the same time.
It certainly has been very challenging, from the beginning of the assignment. And, we initially had the brief to go and restore the bank, which at that time was experiencing a liquidity crisis, a liquidity challenge. So when we got in there, we obviously then uncovered, all of these fraudulent aspects and the mismanagement of the bank, etc. So that certainly threw a curveball our way and complicated matters a lot more. But seeing that we are so far down the line now, I think it's really great. For me personally, it has been really difficult, but challenging, and a good challenge at that. So most certainly with various moving parts, I was happy that we're seeing, a positive steps being taken by the enforcement authorities, and which is great for South Africa Incorporated, SA Inc. Because at the end of the day, it's, whilst we talk about this being municipality monies, at the end of the day, it's actually all the taxpayers' money, and it's all of us as South Africans. So certainly it has been a challenge, and, we continue to navigate the moving parts with one objective, and that is to make sure that we maximize recoveries for the depositors that potentially have lost money in this estate.
The question that I see that I've missed here is the one where a number of people who don't know about curatorship or liquidation or any of these processes have actually suggested that we could have saved VBS Mutual Bank if you compare it to a bank like African Bank, which was billions, which needed billions to actually be rescued into a new bank. And people are saying 3 billion is not enough, it's not a lot of money. You went in there, you found more problems than you had anticipated, as you have said. But what do you think when people say that? Could there have been any way that VBS Mutual Bank could have been saved?
Well, that certainly was the objective. Like I said, when we first went in, the brief was to restore and rescue the bank. And I think the real spanner in the works, so to speak, was the fraud. It was so pervasive, like I said, and to such an extent that the bank was, what was termed hopelessly insolvent. And that's where the liabilities exceeded the assets by a massive margin. So that certainly was a differentiating factor, and that's what made it different to the African bank curatorship, for example. So with the African bank, the circumstances were a bit different. Here, clearly, we had a bank that was already in financial distress. It was, obviously looted out of its assets. And, at that point, we did everything we could as a curator to try and restore that bank. But I guess the numbers speak for itself. At the end of the day, it was really stripped of all its assets, and there was no really reasonable prospect of trying to restore the bank.